So when the framers of the Constitution came up with the power of impeachment, they were creating this incredible, powerful political safety valve. But here's the thing. It was totally untested. They'd never actually used it. This is the story of how the very first generation of Americans had to figure out what this thing even was through a whole lot of trial, error, and some really intense political fights.
Okay, so Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution lays it out pretty clearly. The president, vice president, and all civil officers can be kicked out of office for treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, treason, we get that. Bribery, yeah, that's pretty clear too. But that last part, that was a whole different ballgame. And that's the big question, right? That one little phrase left this huge, kind of dangerous question mark hanging over the entire country. What in the world are high crimes and misdemeanors? Does it mean you actually had to break a law? Or could it be something else entirely? The Constitution just doesn't say. And it would take decades of political brawling to figure it out. So the very first test case for impeachment came from a place nobody expected. It wasn't the president, it was a U.S. senator. And not just any senator. This was one of the guys who had literally signed the Constitution. This is the story of the senator on trial, a founder facing judgment. So who was this guy, William Blount? Well, on one hand, look at this resume. He signed the U.S. Constitution, he was a founder of Tennessee, a sitting U.S. senator. Pretty impressive, right? But on the other hand, he was accused of plotting with a foreign enemy against his own country. And when that came out, it was an absolute shock. The whole scheme, known as the Blount conspiracy, was pretty wild. In 1797, Blount got caught red-handed, scheming with Great Britain. The plan was to raise this army of frontiersmen and Native Americans to go invade Spanish-held lands like Florida and Louisiana. This was a massive violation of U.S. policy, which was to stay neutral. Well, President John Adams gets a hold of this bombshell letter and sends it straight to Congress.
And the reaction in Congress was immediate and kind of complicated. The House of Representatives moved at lightning speed. On July 7th, 1797, they voted to impeach Senator Blount. But then, the very next day, the Senate did something totally different. They voted to expel him, just kick him out of his seat. So now you have these two separate things happening at once, and it set up this huge constitutional puzzle. This created a real constitutional head-scratcher. Once Blount was expelled, could he even be put on trial for impeachment? The Senate had to go back to the Constitution's text, which says impeachment is only for civil officers. So the whole debate became, is a senator a civil officer in the first place? In 1799, the Senate finally made its call. They voted to dismiss the case, basically saying they didn't have the jurisdiction to try him. And ever since, the precedent has been crystal clear. Members of Congress, senators and representatives, are not civil officers who can be impeached. They can be expelled, sure, but not impeached. The first guardrail was officially in place. So, with that first question settled, the tool of impeachment was about to get a whole new job description. It wasn't just a legal tool anymore. It was about to become a political weapon. And that brings us to our second chapter, the Jeffersonian Revolution. You see, the election of 1800 was this seismic shift in American politics. Thomas Jefferson's party, the Republicans, swept in and took control of the presidency and Congress. But there was one branch of government that was still a fortress for the opposition, the Federalist Party, the entire federal judiciary. And this set the stage for a really bitter partisan showdown. The Jeffersonians' first target was a federal judge from New Hampshire named John Pickering, and his case was a mess. He was accused of being publicly drunk on the bench, of shouting blasphemy in his own courtroom, but to make things even more complicated, it was pretty well known that he was suffering from some kind of severe mental illness. Still, in 1804, he made history as the very first U.S. official to be removed from office through impeachment. This put the Senate in a really tough spot. Think about it. Can you, or should you, impeach someone for their behavior if it's caused by insanity? The Jeffersonians basically argued, look, we don't care why he's incompetent, he just is. He's got to go. But the Federalists fought back, saying that being insane isn't a high crime or misdemeanor. In the end, the Jeffersonians won, and they set a new precedent. Even non-criminal misconduct could be grounds for removal. And the Jeffersonians were just getting warmed up. Literally, on the very same day the Senate voted to convict Judge Pickering, the House of Representatives aimed its cannons even higher. They voted to impeach a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Samuel Chase. This was a direct shot at the highest court in the nation. And just look at the charges against Justice Chase. It's really telling. He was accused of being an openly political judge, of campaigning for John Adams, of basically letting his partisan views bleed into his rulings. Notice what's missing? There was nothing about bribery or treason or even being drunk. This was purely about his politics.
But here's the thing about removing a Supreme Court justice. It's a really high bar. You don't just need a majority to convict in the Senate. You need a supermajority, a full 2/3. And while a simple majority of senators did vote to convict Chase on a few of the charges, it just wasn't enough. They fell short of that crucial 2/3 number, and Justice Chase was acquitted. Now, the fact that Chase was acquitted, that was huge. It basically drew a line in the sand. It sent this powerful message that impeachment is not supposed to be a political weapon you use just because you don't like a judge's rulings or opinions. And that was a massive win for the idea of an independent judiciary. All right, so this leads us to our next chapter, refinement and resolution. Over the next few decades, the boundaries of impeachment would be tested and tweaked even more as the country kept trying to figure all this out. So let's fast forward to 1830, to the case of Judge James Peck. This judge totally abused his power. He actually jailed a lawyer for writing a newspaper article that criticized one of his rulings. The House impeached him for it, and while the Senate ended up acquitting him, just barely, the story doesn't end there. The trial itself spooked Congress so much that they passed a new law to limit a judge's power. It proved that an impeachment, even a failed one, could still lead to really important reforms. And then we get to maybe the most straightforward, no-brainer impeachment case in all of American history. In 1862, right in the middle of the Civil War, this federal judge, West Humphreys, just straight up abandoned his job to go become a judge for the Confederacy. He didn't even bother to resign his U.S. post. This was just an open and shut case of disloyalty, and he was, not surprisingly, impeached and convicted very quickly. So, after 70 years of all this trial and error and political fighting, what had the country actually learned? Let's sum up the hard-won lessons from a new nation and look at the guardrails of impeachment that they built. This is really the foundation that was built. From the Blount case, we got the rule: no impeaching members of Congress. From Pickering, we learned that non-criminal stuff, like incompetence, can still be an impeachable offense. Chase's acquittal protected judges from purely political attacks. Peck's trial showed that even a failed impeachment can spark change. And finally, Humphreys made it obvious that, yeah, disloyalty is definitely grounds for impeachment. In so many ways, these are the rules we still play by today.
So these first, often chaotic cases, they built the guardrails that have guided how we use impeachment for over 200 years. They defined who could be impeached, for what reasons, and just as important, for what reasons they couldn't, which really leaves us with one final question to think about. In our own, often turbulent times, how well have those guardrails actually held up?